while the city of San Francisco dreams, oblivious to the horrors that had unfolded in its shadowy corners under the cover of night, a mournful young woman sits silently in unrest, her eyes ever open since roused by the cries of her lover's final act. Hours had passed, each one slipping away like grains of sand falling through the cracks of her fingers as Jazmine clung to Alexa's lifeless form throughout the near eternal night. Her once vibrant eyes, now dulled by tears shed in the darkness, bear the weight of her grief in a somber shade of twilight. She brushes her fingers through the woman's long, black hair as she had done so many times before in the private, intimate moments stolen between the arduous hours of their investigation and their work at MAISON. Jazmine's regrets are endless, but none consume her as much as the time she had failed to give to Alexa. Had she considered the future she had envisioned for them would be imaginary, she would have dedicated every draw of breath to making that evanescent period last a lifetime. The first blush of dawn paints the sky in strokes of orange and amber, and a rolling beam of sunlight casts a delicate veil of warmth across the slumbering woman's face. But it ultimately does not rouse her from her infinite dream, and the sapphire eyes that Jazmine longed to see flutter open just once more remain still. With that, Jazmine's last futile hope leaves, hardening her heart as she resolves to say farewell.
Looks like it's finally morning,
She whispers to Alexa as she rubs her cheek, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. Amidst the desolation of a grimy alley, she refuses to accept it as a fitting resting place for her beloved, and so Jazmine parts with one final kiss on her lips, her other hand tightly gripping her lover's, unwilling to let it go.
Blue. I won't forget again,
She promises, touching the pocket of her overshirt that crosses her heart. Within, a mysterious memento, kept even closer to her heart than the crystal prism hanging from her neck. The gentle grace of Jazmine's fingers slip from her lover's face as the rest of her greets the morning sun. Alexa's earthly vessel dissolves in a shimmering cascade of radiance, her essence liberated to join the morning sky, like hundreds of fireflies off to find their rest. Underneath the golden glow of a new day, armed with a new mission, Jazmine stands alone, surrounded only by a terrible scene of betrayal and murder, revealed only by the light of day. The perfectly bisected Ford Thunderbird, footprints of blood abandoned in haste, spears and shredded cloth, all clues left behind by Alexa for her partner to put together. Jazmine instinctively clenches her fist, unable and unwilling to abate the vengeful anger rising in her soul. There would be no rest for her until the hand of justice had quenched that fire. Floating high above the canopy of brick and steel, the lonesome Private Eyes watches Jazmine from its celestial perch, bearing witness to the first steps of a new and arduous journey. Amidst the towering skyscrapers, a lone figure stands against the golden morning sky, the skeletal vestige of MAISON Tower, its once proud silhouette now reduced to a corpse of jagged metal bones. Police barricades surround the adjacent blocks, clouds of dust and debris littering the streets, a grim reminder of the violence that unfolded in the darkness of night. Against this backdrop of devastation, a taxicab winds its way through the familiar city streets, its occupants unaware of the tragedy that awaits them. Inside, Eloise and Sunny sit in silence, accompanied by the music left playing on the radio when the program is interrupted by a breaking news announcement. Their driver fiddles with the knob to find some station not preempted by this bulletin, but there was to be no respite from the awful news, for just over the next hill, the wreckage left on Electric Avenue broke over the horizon. Pulling up along the curb, the driver haphazardly parks the vehicle to wordlessly join the cacophony of onlookers in collective disbelief. Likewise, the two women can only stand at the edge of the catastrophe and awe at the destruction before them. The radio keeps playing over their consternation, the local news station covering the fall of MAISON, believing it to be the work of the same bombers who threatened the building months ago. The click of a camera calls Eloise's attention, and she turns to see Weston Archer standing against the tape line, equally confused yet still snapping photographs of the devastation with his Polaroid. Perhaps it was done on instinct, or perhaps he was picking at the carcass as some kind of opportunistic vulture, some poetic statement to be made if not sold for coin.
Weston!
The French model erupts in urgency, ripping the photographer from whatever daydream he found himself in.
What happened here?
Well, I don't know, he responds, just as clueless as his Gallic compatriot. The mystery would not linger for much longer as Theodore makes his presence known, speaking over the synchronized bulletin left playing on a myriad of abandoned cars.
It was La Cantina,
he reveals. The three new arrivals turn to see the tailor leaning against one such vehicle, his eyes weary from a sleepless night of concern. And standing beside him is none other than Mickey Finn, returned to flesh and blood, a sympathetic lower spotting his face.
Upman was in the building when it began falling to pieces. I tried my damnedest to save Mina, but weird science has her.
His companion concludes, shaking his head in displeasure.
Seems he's finally lost patience with us because he showed up himself. She should be safe, for now. My guess is he's after her stand, but who knows how long that'll last. Believe me when I say this isn't what I wanted.
Unsatisfied with the men's answers, Eloise lashes out against the hood of a nearby car, anyone to blame but herself.
How could this have happened all of a sudden? Someone should have put a stop to this. Where's the hell are Jazmine and Alexa?
I'm here.
A voice cuts through, though it cracks in a wounded tone as the words stumble forth. Staggering upon the scene of the wreckage is a solitary Jazmine. Dark rings around her eyes reminiscent of her usual makeup. But with the rest of her appearance tousled and ragged, it was evident she had been through her own ordeals. Weston meets her unfocused gaze and asks the question on everyone else's mind.
Where's Alexa?
It was as if life was brought back to the tattered model's eyes as she casts a burning glare toward the photographer. The embers of her rage rekindled in that very moment.
She's gone. It wasn't me that the Square Biz killer took next. It was Alexa.
The group is stunned speechless, the words lost in their collective throats. Sunny is the first to gasp the only conceivable response.
No! What? How?
Jazmine grips her fist as she summons the strength required to speak her next words.
He cut out her heart. A perfectly square hole.
Theodore grimaces in horror, a rebuke of God mouthed voicelessly, as the bubblegum model collapses to the ground in tears, overwhelmed now by the compounding events of the previous night. Even Eloise cannot bring herself to look upon Jazmine's visage as she explains what she had found, and she turns her eyes away remorsefully. But Weston cannot look away, and Jazmine's eyes fall back on him. It's only a fraction of a second. Not even a single heartbeat passes before he realizes his mask has fallen, and he averts his eyes from hers to appear grieved with the group. No one notices, but for a single solitary moment, he was almost convinced he felt something he had only ever felt once before.
Does she know?
He hazards a glance back toward his target, but her eyes have glazed back over and away from him, as though they had never met.
Paranoia,
he realizes and releases his held breath. Looking off into the distance, her hand clasped around the crystal necklace that remains the only tangible piece of her lover left behind. Jazmine finally continues.
I made a mistake. I was wrong about Duffy. About Dior. The Square Biz killer is real. And he's still out there. I was wrong about everything. And that's the price I paid.
No one has the courage to raise their voice beyond a whisper in the void left by Jazmine's harrowing revelation. With his hands covering his eyes in shame, Theodore stirs, gathering what little gumption he can muster.
We grieve with you, Jazmine.
He begins, his lip quivering in hesitation.
He's killed 8 of us now. 7 others before Alexa. I've shed tears for every one of them, and I'm more torn up inside than you could know. But right now, Mina's in danger.
I overheard.
Jazmine admits. Pulling at his lip with one of his canines, the tailor punishes himself for even considering the thoughts now rumbling atop the surface of his mind. As he stumbles through his plea, blood trickles visibly down his chin to stain the pure white ascot dangling from his neck. Everyone could see the pain he was going through just to expel the words from his lips and ultimately be rid of the apprehension.
Then, and I loathe to say it, but maybe, can we, just for a while?
Without needing to spit out the rest of his shameful prayer, Jazmine inherently understands and interrupts.
We can put it aside.
She completes his thought with her own voice so that Theodore needn't trample on those feelings laid bare. It was a concession that caught everyone by surprise, once again seizing their tongues in the face of Jazmine's valor. Realizing this, she takes charge of the scared and scattered lot before her, pressing through the painful memories to collect and guide their attention.
I had all night to say my goodbyes and let go. I gave Alexa the last of my tenderness and warmth. There's no more of that left inside of me. All that's left now.
She pauses, holding out an outstretched hand that she clenches with a snarl of anger before finishing.
Are the cold, hard edges of these fists.
She looks at Theodore, her eyes softening with reassurance as she reminds him.
Tower or not, I haven't forgotten who MAISON is, who we are. And Mina is one of us. I won't lose another.
Tears escape Theodore as he closes his eyes, sighing in relief.
Thank you.
Eloise turns her gaze back to Jazmine with an air of never-before-seen respect for the other woman.
Then what's the plan?
She asks earnestly, ready to take on whatever task ordered of her. Sunny swallows her grief, wiping the wet stains upon her cheeks with her wrists, and stands next to her more serious counterpart while nodding in agreement.
We'll do everything it takes to get Mina back. Just tell us what to do.
I'll help in whatever way I can, too.
The group looks at the source of the promise, surprised to see a determined look on the former La Cantina assassin's face. Mickey explains.
Mina's the last thing left of Jaeger. In a way, she's one of us, too. I know we haven't exactly been buddies, but I'm tired of losing my friends. She's safer with you than weird science. So yeah, let me help.
And welcome to the team.
Jazmine affirms, rounding back her shoulders to finally give them their direction.
We'll take off from the ferry terminal in 20 minutes, so be prepared to fight. We're storming Alcatraz.
The group nods, and Jazmine concludes.
Everyone, make your way to the marina. I'll catch up with you there. I just want a few words with Weston.
No one questions her orders, but the elusive fiend can feel the hairs on the back of his neck rise as he is left alone with their leader, the rest of the team abandoning them to hop on the nearest cable car to whisk them away to battle.
You're asking me to sit this one out, aren't you?
Weston begins, anxious with this opportunity as he works to seed the idea into Jazmine's mind. If he could worm his way out of this battle, he would have ample opportunity to cover his hastily left tracks, especially if this overzealous crew got themselves killed in the process. With these thoughts swirling in his mind, he casts a look to the ground as though ashamed. Another farce.
I get it. I'm worried about Mina as much as any of you, but I'm not much of a fighter. You're probably right. It's best if I stay behind and...
But before he can finish, the photographer is seized by his perfectly secured necktie and pulled down to Jazmine's level by her superior strength. His knees buckling and surrendering to her power. He had almost forgotten how hardened and trained the model was.
Enough with the act!
Jazmine spits.
You're not as innocent as you pretend to be! You're the Square Biz killer after all, aren't you?
Weston's surprise is as genuine as it could be.
What? But that's insane! What makes you think it's me?
From one of the pockets lining the waistband of her skirt, Jazmine retrieves a curious Polaroid picture she thrusts in the liar's face. Weston's eyes go even wider as he confronts the very image he took of Private Eyes, somehow removed from his person and passed along to his accuser. He twitches instinctively, as if to reach for the photograph where he knew it belonged, but stays his hand from betraying his guise of innocence. However, Jazmine didn't need to have witnessed this reflex to be so confident in her assertion, affirming.
Alexa had to have stolen this photo from her killer. Only stand users can see stands, and there's only one stand user I know who uses a camera, let alone takes Polaroids.
Weston isn't allowed a moment to defend himself, as Jazmine tugs even harder on the decorative noose around the photographer's throat, choking him into silence.
So tell me, Weston, What other possible conclusion is there for this photograph?
In desperation, Weston grabs with one hand at his tie and makes just enough room for his throat to squeeze out some kind of excuse.
Look, I really don't know what's going on. What if I'm being set up by someone close? Don't forget, Alexa already used Private Eyes to clear me of any suspicion herself.
The tears wrenched from Weston's eyes might paint his plea in sympathetic colors to anyone else, but Jazmine can see beyond the subterfuge and pulls him in even closer.
Yeah, and it's a damn shame we don't have Private Eyes around anymore to see if you're full of shit. So don't push your luck. That one bit of uncertainty, the fact that I cannot be absolutely 100% certain that I'm right this time, is the only thing keeping you alive right now. Because I am not making any more goddamn mistakes.
She finally and suddenly releases her hold on him, causing Weston to stumble backward and fall to the ground. Her smaller figure towering above him, she casts a long shadow with the morning sun to her back, an imposing eclipse that steals its warmth and leaves only a vacant, icy stare.
New shoes?
She points out, tapping the bottom of his toe with her own. Weston's eyes twitch as a chill shoots down his spine, and that feeling he had written off as paranoia returns. Fear. It is now clear that Jazmine Olivia Joplin was not the simple model he had assumed her to be all along. She was not his prey. She was the predator.
I've already used limelight to see the exact shape and size of the shoes of the man who killed her. Infrared light behaves a certain way with blood. Makes it impossible to miss. Size 11 is pretty rare. It's just another coincidence you have the same size shoes as her killer, isn't it, Weston?
Jazmine looks him up and down from head to toe with a voracious patience, her former reckless abandon left in the alley where she had said her goodbyes.
You're one unlucky guy.
She snarks, her skepticism cutting through Weston's facade like a knife. His attempts to defend himself falter under her merciless scrutiny, leaving him grasping for the words left gagged in his throat. In the face of his stupor, her gaze sharpens further, honing in on the bandage adorning his cheek.
Nicked yourself shaving too, I guess.
Say your excuses!
She spares him the embarrassment.
I already heard them when I was giving myself reasons not to cave your face in. The truth is, you might be innocent. This might be a setup. But whether you're guilty or not, you'll still have the same excuses. So you're going to follow us and show me whose side you're really on.
Jazmine boldly turns her back to the villain, a gesture that seems to taunt him as she strides confidently towards the nearest cable car. It was an opportunity too tempting for Weston to ignore. His hands tremble around his camera instinctually, and he swallows to wet his dry mouth. The only thing he can hear is the sound of his blood pumping, and the lungs in his chest scream for deeper breaths.
One shot,
He considers.
one shot and it's done.
He raises his camera, finger hovering above the shutter release as he watches. But his paranoia would not allow him to take such an obvious misstep. The heavy piece hanging around his neck falls from his grasp, and its impact grounds him. The time was not ripe. After all, was the message of his art not more important? Instead, he simply follows, silent and seething, until Jazmine abruptly stops with one foot on the tram.
Jazmine?
He ponders aloud. The heroine remains aloof, her back facing Weston as she takes in a deep, calming breath of her own, and issues a promise to Weston on the other side of their upcoming battle.
When Alexa fought back, she made sure you couldn't clean up your mess. The crime scene will talk, even without Sunny stickers.
She turns to lock eyes with Weston, a stare that drills uncertainty into his soul.
In the end, Private Eyes will reveal the truth. It always does.
With a resolute step, Jazmine takes the final stride onto the cable car, her determination palpable in each footfall. Behind her, Weston follows suit, burdened by the weight of his terrible secret, his steps heavy and reluctant. The clang of a bell reverberates through the air, a somber toll signaling their embark as the mechanical beast begins its journey, rolling down the hill and delivering the two adversaries toward an uncertain fate. Underneath the dark depths of the San Francisco Bay sleeps a forgotten dungeon, a submerged tomb of concrete embraced by the darkness, whose only link to the light of the outside world lies beyond the maw of the formidable Alcatraz Island. On the surface, it was a long-abandoned federal prison no longer in operation, a forbidding and dangerous island no one need ever set foot upon. But that was only a charade. For even though the stone edifice that rests atop the islet crumbles from years of neglect, its secret underground halls churn and rumble with nefarious machinations. A man once known as Kurt Duffy sits in a rusty old wheelchair, his hair now wiry and gray, his face touched by countless wrinkles, and the light of his eyes befogged by the pain and torture afflicting him. Under the merciless knife of Dr. Weird Science, he was robbed of any means to fight back or escape. For now resting in that seat is a barely sentient stump deprived of its arms and legs. The rambunctious fool, once overtaken by a lust for the vices of this colorful world, was rendered an empty husk, unable to muster a cry for help or shed even a tear for his miserable plight. Yet somehow a droplet of brine hits the granite floor. Knelt before the pathetic lout, Mina bears a single streak from her eye, her mechanical stand cupping the man's cheek. In the midst of probing his mind, with a portion of Duffy's brain now swapped for hers, it was as though the man himself was staring at what he had become. Only he could have any such sympathy for the wretch in the wheelchair.
It seems the mind is interfering with the brain,
the mad doctor concludes as he takes stock of the emotional reverie that captivated both of his prisoners.
Another unpredictable obstacle standing in my way.
The sudden force of a silver hammer rocks Mina far out of the way, disengaging her stand and returning the frightful young woman to her normal self. Her captor stands between them, the burning white light casting his silhouette upon the maiden and swallowing her miniature frame whole.
Did you forget mein promise, Fraulein?
He teases as he grips the now aged man's hoary mane and drags the wheelchair closer to Mina for her to get a better view of her future.
I will not allow you to be an obstacle to my goals. I want you to be cooperative. All I need is thine brain, after all.
In the midst of this torturous demonstration, the madman pauses as if in thought, stroking his chin with a black leather glove.
Yes, just a brain,
he opines in intrigue, but before he can think any further on the burgeoning idea, the room becomes awash in a pulsing red glow as deafening sirens screech throughout the facility.
Intruders have breached the island!
A distressed voice declares through the intercom. Just then, a spark of hope is rekindled in Mina's eyes, as she can only assume one person would be brazen and foolish enough to rescue her from the impenetrable fortress she found herself captive.
Jazmine?
She wonders out loud, but softly, to herself. The doctor looks the two accompanying scientists and nods their way, a silent instruction to secure their prisoner. Doing as they were told, the two nurses in white coats and masks grab Mina by the arms and roughly toss her into the nearby open jail cell. The large iron bars ring out louder than the alarm, as if asserting, "No one will save you from our grasp."
Take this subject to Smirnov.
The doctor commands, folding his hands behind his back as he takes his leave.
It will know what to do with him.
The rusty wheels squeak as Duffy is carted away into the darkness, and soon Mina is left in utter isolation. Her only companion is the ever-present alarm, laughing at her in staccato ridicule. Furrowing her brow, she calls forth peace of mind once more and lifts her hand as a desperate command. The stand obeys, grabbing the rigid beams before them and attempting to bend them to its will. But its strain in doing so is reflected in its user. The young woman pants as though she herself had attempted the preposterous feat.
Am I really so weak?
She mutters, her mechanical companion retreating to await its next order.
The stronger the will, the stronger the stand. That's what Alexa said. I can't just give up.
Mina balls her fists, fingernails digging deep into her skin as she summons all of her resolve, with the thought of her friends on the other side of the impregnable stone walls she was captive within. Peace of mind lifts its own palms to the cage, the symbol of trapped illuminating the dim hall on the other side, as well as the face of an unforeseen foe in the intervals of strobing red lights.
Calvin?
Mina gasps, but he doesn't react, his eyes locked on the glow of her automaton ally's hands. He barely lifts his head to meet her gaze, an inscrutable expression on his sunken face.
You know, Jaeger tried that the first time he was here too.
He finally says with a whisper of nostalgia.
Seems there's something left of him in there after all.
He reaches for something on his belt, and the frightened girl quickly braces herself for an assault, but stops as she hears the quiet jangling of keys. He lifts them to the lock of the cell and swiftly turns the auspicious tool within the latch before pushing the door out of the way. He steps back, a gesture that offers her the freedom she was seeking. And although her better judgment suggests she not trust the criminal, something within her assures her of his character.
You're letting me go?
She questions hesitantly.
I'm not letting you do anything. You can make your own choice,
He answers, putting the large ring back around his belt loop and retrieving a lighter in its stead. In a fluid motion, he ignites the cigarette hanging from between his lips and inhales.
Jaeger wasn't like any of us. He was a detective, a Texas Ranger. He never let us forget it either.
A smile escapes him at the memory, but it fades just as quickly as it had appeared.
He never let that life go. If there was ever a man I'd say had real honor, it was him.
Cal.
She murmurs unbeknownst to herself, and Calvin hangs his head to bury his face back in shadow. Mina can't bring herself to look away, however, and she stands still in the heavy silence, surprised by the strange and solemn atmosphere.
When he tracked you down, Jaeger used a trap that forced you to be the one to set it off, didn't he?
He ultimately wonders. But Calvin didn't need an answer. The way her fingers twitch at her side is enough of a confirmation.
It was his way of keeping his own hands clean, an attempt to absolve himself of the guilt that came with being an assassin. I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves.
Mina bites her lip, tears welling in her eyes as a memory that wasn't hers flashes in her mind's eye. The tone of familiar babble from years gone by, ringing in her ears.
You ever think God forgave Pilate?
A rugged voice called out in the dark, laden with a heavy Texas twang punctuating every word. Calvin stirred across the hall, turning his attention to the adjacent cell of his neighbor. Lying down on his bed, a Bible resting on his chest, Jaeger gazed up through the hundreds of feet of concrete to the unseen heavens above, caught in pensive introspection. The greaser ran his fingers through his hair after contemplating his friend's words and grumbled in confusion.
Who? Pontius Pilate,
The cowboy clarified,
the man that sent Jesus to the cross.
realizing that his leader was still befuddled. He elaborated further.
Pilate saw that he was innocent and washed his hands in front of the mob. Origin of the phrase. His way is saying that they were the ones responsible for killing an innocent man, not him.
Jaeger turned his head to look expectantly at the cell across from him.
Fuck, man, I don't know.
The redhead groaned, and the sound of his own cot creaked under his weight as he fell back onto the paper-thin mattress. The cowboy simply sighed and lifted one of his hands to the heavens, staring deeply at the dirt stuck in every calloused fold. He nodded to himself in reassurance, wearing a frown of remorse plainly on his face.
I'd like to think he did. After all, Pilate had no other choice. It was all part of his plan anyway.
As quickly as the recollection came rolling in, it recedes just as fast, like waves on the beach. A moment in time now withdrawn back into the vast sea of memories hidden in the young woman's consciousness. A certain softness returns to Mina's eyes, though it is hardly distinguishable from the twinkle Calvin remembers belonged to his own subordinate. The greaser shrugs.
Jaeger said the trigger word in the end. So, just like him, you shouldn't feel guilty either.
He smirks faintly, acknowledging the lingering phantom of his friend left in Mina's care. No, perhaps they were simply kindred souls.
In fact, I'm sure if it was between the two of you, Jaeger would have rathered this be the outcome.
The shoulders of the La Cantina captain relax, a small burden lifted from them as he says all he intended to say, and he turns on his heel to leave the liberated girl behind.
His memory should be able to get you out of here.
Wait!
She cries out, feeling more deeply connected with the man she had once viewed as an enemy than she had ever been able to before.
What are you going to do?
Calvin merely continues on his way, The spectral companion then summoned by his side, raising the barrel of its Tommy gun in the air. Without breaking stride, Calvin mutters,
I'm gonna make it rain.
Duffy's wheels creak and squeal as he is pushed down a dark hallway, as if screaming on his behalf. Droplets of seawater leak from the ceiling, and the damp air fills his lungs. But it isn't long before the scenery before him changes. A chill creeps along the stretch of darkness, and the dripping water turns to bitter cold icicles that precariously hang from the ceiling. Shivering, breath visible in the frozen blue underground, two orderlies in the Cretan's charge come at last upon a sealed chamber door, heavy coats beside the portal.
Thank God for these.
One whispers to the other as they help themselves to insulated lab coats. After rubbing her hands to warm them, the scientist swipes her identification card in the slot next to the door and presses her numbing fingers into the keypad. The hatch unlocks with a mechanical churning and slowly reveals the brightly lit laboratory before them, awash in wintry white fluorescence. Within lies an even colder environment, a layer of bitter gelid fog rolling across the floor. Alongside walls of computational equipment are cryogenically preserved specimens and biological samples, all kept behind or within glass enclosures. Caressing a frozen tank of an intact human brain, a pale individual of androgynous features turns their attention to the approaching scientists.
Smirnoff,
The male assistant addresses the glacial figure.
we have a new test subject for you.
But before he can take another step, he is halted as the entity in the lab raises its hand, the tips of its fingers covered in blue frostbite.
In approximately 7.528 seconds, the liquid nitrogen pipe next to you will burst.
It hisses with an icy voice. There isn't much time left for the nurse carting Duffy's wheelchair to react, the pressure gauge before him rapidly rising. With a deafening crack, the pipe fractures, unleashing a torrent of frigid vapor that billows out like a spectral serpent. In an instant, his form is encased in a crystalline shroud, his features frozen in a mask of shock and horror. And as he falls to the floor, he shatters into a myriad of icy shards. His companion takes fearful steps back, the vision of her own gasping breath a reminder that she could easily suffer a similar fate in this Arctic arena. Abandoning their charge, the remaining scientist screams as she flees back down the darkened hall from whence she came. The icy hands of Smirnoff reach for the pitiful wretch in the wheelchair.
Kurt Terrence Duffy, you have no idea what's in store for you.
It whispers, gracing the elderly amputee's temple with fingertips even colder than the air enveloping them. The prophet's cold blue eyes pierce through to the frightened man's soul, not an ounce of emotion stirring within them, as Smirnoff makes a prediction. No, an unspoken promise.
But I do.